Nowadays, you'd scarce believe me if I said that Peugeot was a serious rival to Mercedes-Benz. But in the mid-1970s, that was absolutely the case. The 604 was the company's first attempt at the large executive market. And it was a good one. The car was consistently praised throughout its lifespan, with Car magazine even remarking that it rode better than the W126 S-Class. Unfortunately, the buying public just couldn't see it. And these days you'd be hard-pressed to find a 604. So what went wrong? Peugeot, and France at large for that matter, were on a high in the early 1970s. The 504 of 1969 was immensely popular, and the French economy was enjoying the benefits of the post-war 30 glorious years. Of course, nobody knew 30 was the number of glorious years on offer, and they had just about used them all up. But for now, business was booming, and if Peugeot didn't want to lose its upwardly mobile customers to Mercedes, they'd have to offer a large executive barge for the first time. The first time since the war, at least. The last Peugeot to have a six-cylinder engine was the 601 of 1935. The 604 will be the official successor to that car. The wheel wasn't reinvented here. The 504 platform was taken and stretched to provide the basis for the new car. It would actually use the doors of the 504 almost unchanged, save for the window frames which had to match the new roofline. Development was centred around an engine fit for such a car. The 504's options were decidedly utilitarian. 4-cylinder petrol and diesel lumps between 1.6 and 2.3 litres in displacement. This would call for something more grand. In 1966, Peugeot had entered into a partnership with Renault to manufacture common components. Volvo entered this arrangement in 1971 to create PRV as a limited company. The plan was to develop a V8 engine which would have suited the 604 well. Unfortunately for PRV, those 30 glorious years were just about to run out abruptly with the 1973 oil crisis. A thirsty V8 was suddenly the last engine anyone wanted. The solution was a cheap and a quick one, perhaps not so much a good one. Simply get rid of 2 cylinders, turn it into a V6. Citroën and Maserati had just done something similar to the Maserati V8. Like that engine, this one would retain its 90-degree angle between the cylinder banks, instead of the more conventionally V6 angle of 60 degrees. 90 degrees is fine in a V8, but in a V6 it can create uneven firing orders, which it duly did in the first generation PRV6, until it was corrected later using split crankshaft journals. Regardless, it's safe to say the PRV6 was never the most beloved engine. It made its way into the DeLorean, among a host of other applications. The engine arrived in the 604 in 1975, with a displacement of 2.7 litres, because there were tax penalties for larger displacements. The V6 car would do 0 to 60 in around 10 seconds. Not blistering, but respectable for the time. But it was quite thirsty. This improved somewhat when injection replaced its triple carburetor setup after a year. So the flagship engine was not a huge strength. The car was also offered with the tried and true 2-litre 4-cylinder petrol from the 504, as well as the bulletproof 2.3 diesel for the discerning and not in a hurry buyer. Later it would become the first commercially available turbo diesel in Europe. While Mercedes had the 300 SD available in North America, the 604 turbo beat the European launch of the 300 TD by 7 months. From 1978, a 2.8-litre version of the PRV6 was also available, boosting the performance slightly. The design of the car was Pininfarina, in accordance with Peugeot tradition, and it really shows here. It could be a Fiat 130 coupe from the front. The central section is all 504, but mated to the very boxy front and rear end favoured by the designers at that time. The 504's wheelbase had been extended by just over 2 inches to provide luxury legroom in the back. The 504 itself had been given a very pretty front end by Peugeot's in-house design team, while the rest of the car had been Pininfarina. For the 604, Pininfarina gave the front end their minimalist treatment, losing the Sophia Loren-looking headlights and with them a great deal of character. Really, the 604 benefits immensely from what it did get to keep of the 504. The rack and pinion steering was a rarity even among European luxury of the day, and as a result was precise and well liked in comparison. The long travel suspension of the 504 too, so well suited to African tracks, earned the 604 the preference of Car magazine over the W126 Mercedes. And the car was deemed to be the equal of Jaguar's XJ in ride comfort. The 504's independent rear suspension too lent the excellent road holding of that car to its big sister. Contemporary road tests even remarked that the road holding was enough to make up any deficit in performance exacted by the PRV6. The car was able to retain its energy through corners and didn't have to be harried back up to speed. Paul Bracq, who had designed the W115 for Mercedes, arrived at Peugeot in time to cast his eye over the interior of the 604. The dashboard is not well loved, but not hideous either. The seats, especially the rears, are very well regarded, deep and comfortable, with leather upholstery on offer. In the 604, we're left with what is essentially a better appointed and faster 504. That could have been a winning formula, so what went wrong? Well, one major problem was another better appointed and faster 504, the 505. When it arrived in 1979, 604 sales slashed instantly. This car was indeed another 504 spin-off, again sharing its underpinnings. It was good looking too, better than the 604 if truth be told. The Peugeot front end and headlights were back, and the body was sleek. Paul Bracq had complete oversight on the interior design, and had produced something cutting edge for that time, functional and entirely pleasant. The car was cheaper too, much cheaper than the 604. It would be, it was positioned in the segment below it. Even the top spec 505 was still less money than a base spec 604. The car struggled on for several years before being discontinued in 1985. Its official replacement didn't come for another 3 years after that, arriving in 1989 as the 605, essentially a wider 405. The 604 did have its moment in the sun. The more conservative captains of French industry could be seen in them for a time. Not to mention President Valéry Giscard, who chose one as his presidential transport, ousting Citroën's DS from that role. This may have had more to do with the fact that he was friends with the head of Peugeot, Jacques Calvet, the pair having worked together in the finance ministry. In the end, Citroën's CX really took the reins in PSA's large executive segment as the 80s wore on. The CX had arrived on the scene just before the 604 and was really that car's antithesis. Daring and technologically flamboyant in the Citroën style. Too much so, as it turned out. The CX, its design tooling, brand new factory, bankrupted Citroën and saw them bought up by the slow and steady Peugeot in 1976. Nonetheless, the car was a good one, and more importantly, popular with buyers. Peugeot ended up looking after its large executive stepchild well into the 90s, as both its 604 and 605 struggled to sell in volume. The 21st century car buyer is more concerned with how other people perceive their choice of car than anything else. Prestige, real or imagined, holds a lot of sway. Land Rover is very successful at selling two-wheel drive Range Rovers to people who are only after the badge. The 604 was Peugeot's opportunity to cultivate prestige. For better or for worse, it missed that mark. The brand went on to produce some excellent cars throughout the 80s and into the 90s, lost their way a bit in the 2000s. Apparently they're back on form now. I couldn't rightly say. Everybody does the same thing now.